your host, Effie Pilarinu, and today I need to warn you beforehand because this is an alternative episode. I have the pleasure to have with us Professor Crenguta Leaua, if I pronounce your name correctly. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Crenguta, we met in Davos. You are a professor of law, specialized, if I understand correctly, in international arbitration and new technology law. You're also the director of the Swiss Institute for Alternative Thinking. I'm not going to go through all your long resume, but this, I hope, gives our listeners an understanding of the very interesting alternative topics that we'll be discussing together. We met in Davos at one of the big blockchain events of the Global Blockchain Business Council, where you were participating in a panel there. And I want to start from there a bit, just to get a feel of your main takeaways from this World Economic Forum meeting in terms of these alternative technologies, be it blockchain, be it AI, and so on.
Well, indeed, it was an extremely intense meeting, the meeting concerning the blockchain technology, but this is, to me, almost natural. So it was a lesson that I took from Davos this year, that what is natural as importance worldwide, it gets to the Davos agenda eventually. And this is because the blockchain technology at this moment is revolutionizing both the public and the private sector in a number of their main activities. We are linked with ledgers on so many levels that we cannot even be aware of how many they are, from identity, from recording of property, from recording of employees, shareholders, etc. So our world is full of ledgers, and this technology is revolutionizing the way in which we interact with these ledgers. So for this reason, it's a part of the agenda of the public sector, of the private sector, and then all the other elements brought by the artificial intelligence are to be considered as well as automizing part of our relationships. So to me, it was absolutely natural to see how Davos this year focused also on these events, and particularly the surrounding events around the main meeting of the World Economic Forum were focusing this topic as well.
I would agree with you. I mean, it was stunning, the intensity or the percentage, if you want, of events around the World Economic Forum or during the World Economic Forum that were focused on this topic and a variety of use cases. Crenguta, you are a specialist in arbitration. Tell us a little bit about arbitration in an AI-driven world. And I'd like to start with AI because it's easier to understand applications, and there's probably more already that we are aware of in the world. But how can we start thinking about arbitration and AI?
Arbitration is an alternative to the legal system and the jurisdiction of the courts of law, of the state courts of law. So it's an alternative to state justice. It's, if you want, a private justice. And it has been developed as a tool additional to the globalization. So according with the history of arbitration, we will have a very significant point of development at the time of globalization. And that is for a reason. And that is that in international trade, in the international interconnectivity brought by the international trade, We need a tool by which we can solve the disputes in a way that is not related to one state or another, that is independent from the geography of the states, because the logic of the state is based on their territory. Therefore, they are limited in their jurisdiction to a specific space, while the globality in its notion is worldwide. So arbitration responded to this need of having arbitrators, private judges that were able to solve the disputes irrespective of their home country and not taking into consideration their background necessarily, having then a decision at the end that you can enforce worldwide. And it was a moment, a very significant one in 1958, the New York Convention, where actually the arbitral award was given a power to be enforced, to be useful afterwards, if you need to enforce it anywhere in the world in which you have a signatory state to that convention. And this is more than 150 countries. If you think at that, a judge's decision will be enforceable only in those countries that have a treaty with the country of origin. If you want, is the difference between a passport that needs 1 visa, 2 visas, 3 visas every time you want to travel, or the situation in which you have one passport who contains already 150 visas on it.
Embedding.
So it's a very big difference. And for that reason, it is important to be used nowadays very much in all the technologies that are related to globalization. And the blockchain technology with its decentralization, all technologies that are based on the internet and the artificial intelligence as a new technology take benefit of this power of the arbitration to be applicable afterwards in an interconnected world with less restrictions at every single border.
Very interesting. I wish we could borrow in finance and in fintech and in cross-border issues a lot of these principles. I'm not sure that this really applies to the financial industry that is heavily regulated. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in fact, as a matter of fact, yes. In about, I think, 4 years ago, it was a working group at the International Chamber of Commerce, which is the biggest organization of traders worldwide, at the Court of Arbitration there, who addressed precisely this topic, which is the use of arbitration in the context of the financial industries. And it is a good material. I could easily share it with you, and then for those interested to look at it, we may maybe place it in the comments for them to find it.
Yeah, can AI be used to sort of implement arbitration, or in that way, and how can I say, facilitate some type of automation and reduce frictions at the end of the day, because that's what really we're talking about reducing frictions in processes, whether it's, you know, trade or whatever it is. I guess arbitration is all about that. And so are these technologies that are trying to automate in secure and compliant or legal ways different transactions.
If we speak now about the automated justice, the automated decision-making for deciding over disputes, now that is a topic of interest, because justice is equally important with other values in our society, like health or protection of our environment or other aspects of human rights, etc. So have access to justice is a basic human right. So for that reason, usually all technologies that are implementing artificial intelligence in the justice making, whether it is a state justice system or a private system, I think will fall eventually into the logic of the high-risk technologies. So they will be somehow looked, at least as the European Parliament appear to think nowadays, maybe worldwide it would be different, but at the level of European Union, it is this thinking of ranking artificial intelligence technology use cases based on their impact, and justice, health, usually are human rights in general, are high risk, which means that it is a high responsibility, but it doesn't mean that it is not a high opportunity as well. So it can be used, but we have to do it with cautious and with a lot of attention. Why? Because at this moment, we cannot automate, but what it is possible to anticipate. So in order to automate something, we have to predict the behavior. And the role of justice is actually different than the role of law. The role of law in any society, it's actually to, if you want, automate social behavior. We are told how to behave in a society. We have a prediction as to how people would behave, but the justice is the regulatory system to that. It is made to sanction and enforce the situation that deviate from the rule, and also to explain or decide whether a situation is or is not an exception. So this, by its very nature, it's a regulatory mechanism in any kind of system. So justice is almost like an adaptive system of the rules to the behavior of those who have to comply with the rules. I'm trying to explain that in the logic of programmers now, because if you think about lawyers are the ancient programmers, we were programming the social behavior when we were making the laws. So it's an interesting analogy. So coming back to your question, if you think to replace a human being making this assessment, this adjustment, you have to understand what kind of decisions are to be taken, and whether those decisions are straightforward, are simpler, you can predict them, you can automate them because you can program them, or they are high complexity ones in which you do not look at elements that can be easily predicted. Like, for instance, when you'd have to decide to whom a child should be given in custody. Yes, given in custody to one parent or another, or whether it is a matter of relationships in which personal behavior was extremely important, in which it was about how you build trust. Like, for instance, whether a person has been embezzled or not. These are trust-related issues. And those are looking very much at the psychology of humans. And the judge, or a private judge, an arbitrator, would not only look at the law and the facts, it would look also at the overall understanding that it has over the situation. And in some legislations, there is even a very interesting provision. It says like this, that the judge should decide based on the law and its own conscience. So we have two elements in the judge's decision, the law and the conscience of the judge. Now we can automate the application of the law, but we have no ways at this moment to automate conscience. So that, for that reason, I believe that automation will find its place in arbitration in general and in justice, but as a helping tool. It will help automizing some processes. But always we will have to have some sort of cockpit, if I can call it like this, where a human being will have to stay and have the final say. My own view on that. But we are predicting future, so each of us is entitled to think.
We are assessing the degree of this hybrid combination of humans with machines, right? Which we are already there, but of course, those proportions right now are, we are overweight relative to the machines, but we are swiftly moving those weights, and that's really the question. And in what areas, because there'll be, like with decentralization and automation, there'll be areas that will be completely automated, completely decentralized, and that would be the right thing. And then there'll be areas that they will be the exact opposite. And I guess that's where we all collaboratively need to decide which are the areas that we keep. And that has to do with our values, I guess, and what's important for the society. Now let's jump to the metaverse, as if we don't have enough issues to solve here in the real world. But the metaverse continues to be, I guess, you know, it's fascinating. I was actually last week at an event here in Zurich, Asset Rush, and they were talking about the metaverse on stage as a vision, giving, of course, some examples. And I know you have a fantastic and alternative way of thinking of the metaverse. I had the pleasure to read one of your articles that describes this. And since it's very much related to Greek mythology, I had to hear from you your thoughts on this topic, which is really a framework, if that's the way I understood it, of how to start thinking about the metaverse and how it may shape up and what are the possibilities. So can you tell us about this world that you describe in your article that talks about a layered universe, right?
Well, yes, I must say that Greek mythology and later on Greek philosophy was so powerful into its impact over the next generations that even now the easiest way sometimes to explain something is to go back to Greek philosophy or Greek mythology. Why? Because it is a system in which universe is explained. And if you are facing a situation in which the main coordinates of the universe are changing, you need to get back to the system and try to see how you can put things in order. If you notice at this time, there are a lot of discussions about AI and ethics. Before going into AI and law, because usually ethics is before law. Law comes in a second step to regulate part of the elements which are already part of the ethics. But if you think about that, you cannot do that without understanding exactly where is the place of the situation that you're referring to. And this is, in the case of the metaverse, is the very definition of what metaverse is. Because you can look at the metaverse and you can look at it as a game. And if it is a game, that's it. It's a place in which there are no other legal relationships or legal impacts, but like in a playground, and that's it. And then you can discuss it with analogies related with, for instance, sports and the regulations in sports, or you can think of it as an additional territory to which the humans behave. And we have this normal territory in which we are nowadays with all our senses, you know, like touching, smelling, feeling, seeing, hearing, all these kind of elements that builds our input about what reality is. And then we have the augmented reality or artificial reality, the virtual reality, which are basically, by their own definitions, creating a sense of reality to the person who is in that condition of senses. So you will have another territory. Where is this territory? Is it as on a flat reality in the same level with all other realities? Is it entering, for instance, in the metaverse, the same and having, let's say, our conversation in the metaverse with our avatars, the same as us meeting online or us meeting face to face? It's on a flat territory, or they are different characteristics that may differ and make the situation be more specific. And the Greek mythology has this perception of the universe being layered. And it also has a certain explanation as to how rules from one layer must or must not be complied with in the other layers. And in the Greek mythology, it was the upper realm, the middle realm, and the lower realm. If we would make to have this analogy, it would be the Olympus, where the gods were, the creators of everything. If we make the analogy, now we are creating the metaverse. So we are the creating of this world. That's one thing. Then you had the world which was called the middle realm or the earth. In our case, this is becoming the metaverse. And then it was the realm, the underworld, where Hades was located, where it was a situation of a different kind. And I will revert to that because it's interesting what will happen with the failed metaverse versions. What will happen in time with the situations that do not longer stay active, but they are still not without consequences. And this is
the previous versions are the previous generations as we
Absolutely.
like to think
Yeah.
in the underworld of the Greek mythology.
Exactly. Where do you put them if you don't stop them, if you let them be, and you do not completely shut them down? And sometimes you cannot, because they have consequences that follow in time. So if that is a situation of the three layers, if we move that to the metaverse, what we see? We see that we here as human beings, we are creating a new territory. We see that us in that territory, we do not enter with all our personality, with all our senses, with all our body, but with parts of it. So we enter into that territory through avatars. Those avatars are different shapes that we may take. In the metaverse, we can have different shapes. We can be in the shape of a chair, in the shape of a human, in the shape of a dog. So we can take different shapes that we decide to have as avatars. Well, in the Greek mythology, gods were coming on earth in different shapes. Zeus, for instance, the supreme god of the Olympus, was using those kind of shapes to, charm ladies that were inhabitants of earth. So that was an interesting, humorous way in which the ancient Greeks were trying to explain things as to make them understandable. But this is true nowadays as well. If we look at our behavior in the metaverse, either we can take it as a playground and then we play with whatever we want there, or we take it seriously. So coming back to the analogy, what do we have on earth? And nowadays we have human beings, and in the Greek mythology we have gods as visitors. In the metaverse we have I would call them characters. If we look at the metaverse coming from the game, originating from the game world. Otherwise, if we originate it as self-standing, I would rather suggest that they might be called even beings, but let's call them characters. And those that are familiar with gaming, they know that they are playable characters and non-playable characters. Basically, playable characters are characters in which you can go as an avatar and influence their behavior. So you go into the metaverse in your avatar and you do whatever you want with that avatar in the metaverse. And then there are the non-playable characters, which are characters that are self-standing. Like, for instance, you would populate a metaverse with animals or with humans that are not avatars of anybody else. They are just automated characters, persons that are existing only in the metaverse in the way that they are programmed to exist. If you use artificial intelligence for that, and this is the normality for the situation, you get to what I call the purely artificial beings, with or without, we can discuss of self-awareness. That's a different story. But nevertheless, we interact. And if we would meet in the metaverse, I would have to know whether the other one, it's an avatar of a human being, or is this purely artificial creature? Okay. It's a character of the game. That's one thing. So revealing who you are in the metaverse is one option, one problem. The second one, when I interact with the other, is the other aware about who am I? Does it consider me as being an artificial creature or a human being? And analogies here, I don't know, for those who saw the Westworld, for instance, the movie, or either the original or the series on, each of the situations there were a situation of identifying who's the artificial being and who is not. So that is an important element as well. And these are about identity in the metaverse and transparency as to the identity. And then the next level, when I'm moving in the metaverse, do I have to observe the rules of the outside world, of this world? For instance, Zeus, when he was, I don't know, charming a lady on Earth, was he cheating his wife Hera in the Olympus or not? I mean, having this kind of behavior in a different territory, was it to be considered a violation of the rules of the first layer or not? And this is another interesting question that we have to think of. And I think that it is good because if we look at the Greek mythology, the gods, whenever and wherever were behaving, they were supposed to behave at the dignity and the level of a god, because otherwise they were violating their rules. So we as humans, whether we behave in the metaverse or we behave here, we should still comply with all the laws that are regulating our behavior in this context. That is the logic and the lesson that we take from the Greek gods. And then the last part of what I would like to say is that if you look at this analogy, it's also very important to have enforcement mechanisms, because one of the things that is very interesting in the Greek mythology is that gods created some tools in which they were communicating and influencing the behavior of the humans. In our case, we have to have tools by which we can intervene and correct or amend the behavior of the automated creatures, automated characters of the artificial beings, of the characters of the game. So if they are deviating from their normal behavior as programmed, we need to be able to intervene to that. And that intervention, it's quite interesting, because at the level of gods in the Greek mythology, how they did that? First of all, they included in the human beings some sort of embedded moral, embedded ethics. All of us have some laws of behavior, like not to kill, not to disrespect, not to steal, so to respect others. So we have this kind of embedded values in us. This, if we move to the artificial beings, is about embedding values into the artificial beings. And that is very important to characters, to be characters that have these kind of values as their coordinates, as their structure, the embedded values. And then they are the learned behaviors. And we as humans, we learn, and the machine learning also can lead to learned behaviors. For the learned behaviors, these may or may not deviate from the law or from the rules. For us as humans, how we have this solved? We have two ways in the Greek mythology. First is the intervention of gods, which is expensive and complicated, and gods are not in the Greek mythology enjoying enough attention to pay attention to all the behavior of all the humans all the time. So they were not exactly working like police officers all the time. They were letting the humans behave. They were intervening sometimes. And that is the situation for the metaverse as well. I mean, you cannot have a person looking into the metaverse all the time and programming every single situation. You will have to have it automated somehow or self-regulated. And then we, as humans, we developed our own justice system. So we developed our own way in which we regulate our own behavior. If we look at the automation, if we look at the artificially created characters, this should have the same situation in which they themselves can have some automated system in which they regulate their behavior and adapt their behavior so to comply with the rules. I haven't seen much development in this situation. I've seen a lot of artificial intelligence work in order to adapt system to the requirements of the external, but I haven't seen much as to automate the self-regulation adaptation as to the behavior. So that is an area in which I think we will see some developments in the future, in the logic of what the Greek mythology presented as being needed. And then we have the oracle, and that is beautiful because you know what? Zeus' first wife was Hera, which was the goddess of fertility. Basically, it was the business developer of the world. She was giving birth to everything. So honestly, it was about the. I know and please consider me completely respectful, but it's such a beauty in these thoughts that I cannot but smile thinking of them. But Zeus then got a second wife, and you know what? This was Themis, which was the goddess of justice. So after you have a lot of business development, at some point in time, you need to regulate that world. Oh, wow. So the second wife of Zeus was Themis. And Themis is the one who built the Oracle of Delphi, at least in some legends. And what the Oracle of Delphi did was to transfer the will of the gods into this world. So basically moving from the layer above to this layer, whatever it was needed. It was the regulatory intervention assistance of the gods in our world. If we look at what we do in the metaverse, we need to have a regulatory system. And actually, this is what the blockchain industry names those that are inputting information into the blockchain. They are called oracles. So in the language of the blockchain industry, that person or that source of information into the system off-chain is called oracle. So in our case, if you go from the upper layer into the metaverse, you are the oracle. Oracle of Delphi, what was doing? It was saying to humans what the will of God was. Exactly the same. So it's funny to think in this way, but in a way, it gives you comfort that we are not outside mental models. We are not outside a structure of thinking that help us present the current situation as it should be. So just to put a last point on my story, the laws of physics. You know that gods, when they built Earth in the Greek mythology, they put the laws of physics into the universe. We have, for instance, the gravity. So that makes that it is no need for us, for instance, to have a crime, the crime of jumping on the moon, because you cannot jump on the moon. You can use other methods, but you cannot jump on the moon as a human being. So we only have laws for what is physically possible, not for what physically is impossible. Now, when we build a metaverse, there are two options to work with a metaverse. Either we work with a metaverse in the way that we create complete freedom as to the laws of physics. And then, you know, you can shape architecturally beautiful spaces. You can make the rivers go upstream. You can work that beautiful part of imagination in the metaverse, but you can also do something else. You can expand the laws of physics as to cover some of the behavioral laws. And if it would be impossible for an avatar, for a human in the metaverse to harm another being, to hit, to steal, to violate any of the laws that we consider important in the metaverse, then we can embed in the metaverse as laws of physics of the metaverse, something that here they are just behavioral laws, that they are laws of the human behavior, not of the physics. And this is interesting because we have now the chance either to build a better world in which we can incorporate such impossibilities to be otherwise than moral or otherwise than legal, or we can do the opposite, and well, we shall see what will happen. Not sure I would like to see that.
Very interesting. On the one hand, from all that you described, and again, I mean, I have read your article, but you know, the way you animated, of course, makes it much more lively, and it's planting seeds. I mean, on the one hand, I'm hearing that there are archetypal, how can I say, elements that we could and should take from this connection that you are making, from this alternative thinking that you are introducing. And this is a guide, and it makes us also aware as to the great responsibility that we have in terms of what we choose to do, and to avoid a lot of blind spots, like making choices and then suffering consequences because we didn't realize what complications our choices made. I really love this analogy. And in the last part where you spoke about what kind of physical laws we decide to you know, design in this metaverse, I'm thinking that, you know, we could choose to design sort of what we would consider an ideal world that doesn't exist, and train ourselves and the machines there and have these feedback loops. I guess that would be an angelic world, I guess.
I love your thought, because basically the extremes, if we go to the extremes, is either that we build a world in which any behavior is possible, but we have laws of physics, and basically this is where we are right now. Or you build the opposite, which is a world in which you have any laws of physics you want, but the behavior must be that embeds the value that you wish. So this is an angelic world, because that is the very definition of the angelic world, in which you have no laws of physics, but you do have the behavior that is completely moral by its nature. To me, I think that the area in which we are going to develop will be once again an extremely beautiful one. It's almost like a second renaissantiste, I would say, like the French would pronounce it, a second era of illuminism, if you want. Why? Because we are going to back again, to go back again to blending spirituality, philosophy, technology, and us. If we don't put them all together, we cannot move into this territory in other way, but really dangerous or chaotical. And this is why everybody at this moment uses and tries to get into the word of ethics, because ethic is the common word that nowadays we are using to somehow try to shape the values of what it is important. But ethics, if we look backwards in time, I mean, if you look at the history, comes from both spirituality and philosophy. They are not, you know, belonging to the law. Law is something much later in the story. It basically is when the states intervene. But before that, we have other tools. And I think we are going to see a very, very interesting era in which people that have these backgrounds in the four areas will come up: human behavior, technology, spirituality, and philosophy. And it's a wonderful time to be a human being and to live that. I mean, I think we are very lucky to live these times.
I feel the same. I mean, I think that we all as human beings imagine a world with no wars, with none of these racial discriminations and biases that have been implanted in us because of this fragmentation of countries and so on. And maybe we will be sort of running there in the metaverse to experience that, and that feedback loop will make our behavior as a collective much better. I guess this is the best outcome. And of course, we all know that nothing happens linearly, right? So we shouldn't be expecting and monitoring every step, but looking at that direction. I think that we did what we were planned to do, which was share really an alternative perspective, a human perspective. And there's a lot of thinking to anyone that listens to this discussion, because it is thought-provoking. I'd like to thank you, Crenguta, a lot for your insights. And of course, I will share with our audience your coordinates on LinkedIn as you share wonderful research and thoughts that you do. Again, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you again for providing me the opportunity to be in a dialogue with you.